In a landscape where geopolitical tensions are rising, few topics are as contentious and uncertain as the nature of U.S. China relations. As former President Donald Trump prepares for a potential second term, questions loom regarding his administration's China policy. Jane Perlez, a former Beijing bureau chief for the New York Times and now a fellow at Harvard University's Kennedy School, recently shared her insights in an interview with the Boston Globe, expressing the perplexities surrounding Trump's approach. "I don't think anybody knows," she remarked, underscoring the unpredictable nature of his foreign policy. Perlez, who also hosts the podcast Face Off, the U.S. versus China, highlighted the importance of this relationship, suggesting that the trajectory of U.S.-China interactions will significantly shape global dynamics. The stakes are undeniably high as both nations stand as superpowers with substantial economic and military capabilities. Yet, as recent discussions among political science experts reveal, the way forward remains fraught with potential pitfalls. During a seminar hosted by the Alexander Hamilton Society, three East Asian Studies professors, Terence Roehrig and David Fields from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and Stephen David from Johns Hopkins University, examined the current state of U.S.-China relations. They agreed that while war is not imminent, the U.S. is on a path that could escalate tensions further. Fields noted that U.S. foreign policy towards China often appears counterproductive, driven by fears of being perceived as weak domestically rather than aligning with national interests. When being weak is the driver of policy rather than what is truly in the national interest, then I think we are in real danger of not getting off this road to confrontation, he cautioned. The professors also discussed the sensitive issue of Taiwan, a critical flashpoint in U.S.-China relations. Recent changes in U.S. policy, including the removal of statements from the State Department that discouraged Taiwanese independence, have raised alarms. This shift, coupled with President Biden's assertive comments about defending Taiwan, later tempered by the White House, signals a move away from the long-standing U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity. Roehrig emphasized that this evolving stance could provoke heightened tensions in the region, complicating an already delicate balance. Further complicating the situation is the broader ideological divide between the U.S. and China. David pointed out that the current political climate in the U.S. shows a bipartisan consensus against Chinese products and companies, which feeds into a narrative of economic hostility. He observed, "We have a Congress that can't agree on renaming the post office. But they can agree that we all hate the Chinese." This sentiment can intensify perceptions in China that U.S. actions are not solely based on policy but rather a broader intent to undermine Chinese economic interests. Moreover, David expressed concerns about potential repercussions from the Trump administration's recent shifts in policy regarding Ukraine, suggesting that a perceived weakening of U.S. support for democratic nations could embolden Xi Jinping's regime regarding Taiwan. "I grew up in a world where America always took the side of democracies against autocracies," he lamented, indicating a departure from a historical norm that prioritized democratic support. As the world watches closely, the future of U.S.-China relations appears increasingly precarious. The interplay of domestic politics, foreign policy decisions, and historical tensions creates a complex web that could have far-reaching consequences. With both nations at a crossroads, the need for a clear and strategically sound policy is paramount. As experts continue to analyze these dynamics, one thing remains clear: the decisions made today will shape the global order for years to come. The evolving narrative of U.S.-China relations will undoubtedly continue to unfold, inviting scrutiny and debate among policymakers and scholars alike. As tensions between the United States and China continue to escalate, experts are increasingly concerned about the ramifications of a potential trade war and its broader geopolitical implications. A recent seminar hosted by the Alexander Hamilton Society at the University of Wisconsin-Madison brought together three prominent political science professors to examine the trajectory of U.S.-China relations under President Donald Trump's administration. Their insights shed light on the mounting pressures that could lead to conflict, as well as the missteps that have characterized U.S. foreign policy. The discussions were led by Professors Terence Roehrig and David Fields from the University of Wisconsin-Madison alongside Stephen David from Johns Hopkins University. The seminar held on March 6, 2025 emphasized that while a military confrontation is not imminent, the current trajectory of U.S. policy risks exacerbating tensions. Fields noted that the U.S. response to China has often been driven by a domestic fear of appearing weak rather than a strategic assessment of national interests. When being weak is the driver of policy rather than what is truly in the national interest, then I think we are in real danger of not getting off this road to confrontation. He warned. The professors criticized the U.S. withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the implementation of export restrictions on Chinese semiconductors as examples of counterproductive policies that do not align with American interests. Fields highlighted the need for sensible changes to this approach but expressed skepticism about the likelihood of such shifts occurring in the current political climate. If you talk to anyone in Washington, they will say it's a non-starter because they think the American people wouldn't support amicable policy, he explained. A particularly contentious issue discussed was the U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity concerning Taiwan. Roehrig pointed out that recent changes, including the removal of the phrase "we do not support Taiwan independence" from the State Department website, signal a shift in U.S. posture that could provoke a response from China. The status quo is being shaken, he said, emphasizing that Taiwan's independence remains a critical flashpoint in U.S. China relations. David elaborated on the ideological divides between the two nations, asserting that the U.S. Congress has reached a consensus on an aggressive stance toward China, which complicates relations further. He noted, "We have a Congress that can't agree on renaming the post office, but they can agree that we all hate the Chinese." This sentiment, he argued, contributes to a perception in China that U.S. actions such as the crackdown on apps like TikTok and companies like Huawei are not merely policy decisions but targeted attacks on the Chinese economy. As the professors examined the broader implications of U.S. foreign policy, David raised concerns about the Trump administration's recent shifts regarding Ukraine, suggesting that a perceived weakening of American support for democratic nations could embolden China's President Xi Jinping to take more aggressive actions regarding Taiwan. That world seems not to be in evidence today, he lamented, reflecting on a time when the U.S. was seen as a staunch ally of democratic movements worldwide. The seminar highlighted the pressing need for a re-evaluation of U.S. strategy toward China, especially as the geopolitical landscape becomes increasingly fraught. With the potential for a trade war looming and the specter of military conflict on the horizon, the discussions among these scholars underscore the importance of forging a path that prioritizes long-term stability over short-term political gains. As the situation develops, it remains to be seen whether U.S. policymakers will heed these warnings and adapt their strategies to foster a more constructive relationship with China. In a landscape increasingly defined by geopolitical tensions, recent reports underscore the growing complexity of military dynamics involving the United States, China, and their respective allies. A new analysis has raised concerns about China's expanding military footprint in Africa, particularly its potential utilization of ports across the continent for military purposes. Meanwhile, the United States continues to dominate the global arms market, significantly outpacing both China and Russia in weapon exports. According to a report highlighted by Stars and Stripes, the United States must remain vigilant about China's increasing military presence in Africa, where it has been developing strategic port infrastructure. The potential for these ports to serve dual purposes, civilian and military, poses a significant challenge to U.S. interests in the region. The report emphasizes that such developments could facilitate China's ability to project power more effectively across the continent and potentially threaten U.S. naval operations. The strategic implications of this expansion could reshape the balance of influence in Africa, an area that has historically been pivotal for global trade routes. In parallel, the U.S. arms industry has solidified its position as the largest arms dealer globally, accounting for a staggering 43% of all weapon exports between 2020 and 2024, as per data from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute (SIPRI). This figure indicates the U.S. exported approximately 7.3 times more weapons than China and 5.5 times more than Russia during the same period. Notably, U.S. arms exports increased by 21%. Contrasting sharply with a 64% decline in Russia's arms exports, which reflects the impact of international sanctions and military setbacks resulting from the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The implications of these arms sales are multifaceted. The U.S. not only supports its allies through military exports but also strengthens its own defense industry, which is crucial for national security. As NATO members increased their defense budgets spurred by recent geopolitical tensions, the U.S. military-industrial complex stands to benefit significantly from heightened demand for advanced weaponry. Ironically, while the U.S. arms exports soar, recent events have highlighted vulnerabilities within its military ranks. In a troubling incident, 2 active-duty soldiers and a former soldier were arrested for allegedly conspiring to sell classified military information to Chinese agents. The individuals involved were accused of sharing sensitive data regarding U.S. military capabilities, including information on advanced weapons systems. This breach not only raises alarms about internal security but also exemplifies the lengths to which foreign adversaries may go to obtain critical military intelligence. As tensions escalate, particularly in the context of Iran's growing military ties with China and Russia, experts warn of the potential risks to U.S. and Israeli security. The recent joint naval exercises conducted by Iran, China, and Russia highlight a strategic collaboration that could challenge U.S. interests in the Middle East. The exercises serve as a stark reminder of the shifting alliances that could reshape the security landscape, particularly if these nations enhance their military interoperability. In conclusion, the interplay of military capabilities, arms trade dynamics, and strategic partnerships will likely define the international security environment in the coming years. As nations like China expand their military reach and the U.S. seeks to assert its dominance in arms sales, the global balance of power remains in flux. With potential flashpoints in Africa and the Middle East, the world watches closely as these developments unfold, aware that they could have profound implications for global stability. Future engagements and diplomatic efforts will be crucial in navigating this complex terrain as countries attempt to balance national interests with the pressing need for cooperation in an increasingly multipolar world.